I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody.
Good morning. This Saturday, we're going to place a major focus on education. I know many of you are wondering, parents, business owners, what's happening with schools, particularly K to 12. What's happening with our children? How do they go back? How is it that they're going to be safe? How is it that they're going to learn at the rate that we expect them to achieve? I have two experts, two of our really most qualified educators for this season. And they're going to share some really great insight, I think, educating students during a pandemic using remote learning. I'm going to start with Dr. Lee. One of the problems that we want to talk about today is on the minds of almost every parent, every business owner. How have public schools been impacted by the pandemic? And what is your school district and other school districts, Dr. Leak, around the state done to address the issues that your students, their families are faced with this pandemic called COVID-19?
It's interesting because this all started almost a year ago now. On March the 16th was the last day that we could officially be open the way that we had been before. And so needless to say, we had to pivot very quickly. So there were several areas that then had to be addressed. One was, how are we going to provide instruction for our students on a consistent, continual basis so that we didn't have to deal with what we're dealing with in terms of that slide in participating in school. So we had to make sure that was done. We had to make sure that we were feeding our young people, because the young people that we service, they rely on breakfast and lunch, and sometimes for snacks. Their parents rely on us to make that happen. And so those were kind of the two right out the cuff major impacts. And then, of course, we had to deal with what was happening with the social emotional aspects of this as well, because our young people, when they come to school, we don't just provide them with the academics, we also provide them with that personal, that social, that emotional support. Many of them needed to be in a classroom with their teacher because that was a safe space for them during the day. So we had to also deal with that component as well. So the impact, when you just ask about the impact, it has been enormous in that we've had to pivot to teaching in a remote environment. We've had to pivot to providing food for our families in a remote environment. We've had to pivot to providing social services to our young people in this environment. So it's not just one. I think when people look at it, they're just like, oh, the kids they need to be in school so they can learn. School isn't just where I go to learn reading, math, and social studies and science. We are an integral part of the community. And so as a school district, we've had to figure out how to deal with that and make that happen on a daily basis since March the 17th.
You know, I learned during this time frame that several parents were taking turns taking care of students. So if one parent in the community had to work on one day, then maybe the neighbor would have as many as 10 kids in her home to educate. And so just learning about, you know, always hear the term, it takes a village. Just learning about, even in the situations where the resources were not as high as some of us might not have, great community members, great human beings that we serve said, figured out ways to work it out in the home setting.
So you're saying that even in the districts where the students and families live at or below poverty, or they're designated as needing extra resources, they figured out how to create learning pods.
They
Not
did.
officially, but they had to do what they had to do because many of the parents worked 2 and 3 jobs and could not afford to stay home. So
Right.
I know, Dr. Lee, you
Yeah.
shared with me some time ago how it is your district made budgetary adjustments to make sure that every child had the resources they need to learn remotely. So can you share for those who are viewing what kinds of things you did in your district?
We had already done a survey when we saw this coming to determine what devices our students had at home and how we could transition our teachers so that they could move from I'm in the classroom and I'm doing lessons to I now have those students at home and keeping them engaged. And so we sent our students home with devices for those who needed them. But then over the course of the summer, we took our stimulus dollars and we purchased Chromebooks for every student. And actually our stimulus dollars, they weren't enough. So we allocated district funds to also support making sure that every student had a brand new Chromebook. And we also purchased services for hotspots, because one of the things, and Dr. Whitaker spoke to this too, we saw that some of our families were having maybe 4 or 5 children from the community at the church. Maybe the church opened up a space and they were there, but they didn't have enough internet access for that many people in one space. Or some of our homes needed internet access. So we actually worked on getting hotspots for every family who needed them. And then as a district, we've picked up the cost of those hotspots so that a family, and in some cases, we have families that have 5 and 6 children. So if you've got 5 and 6 children and you only have a certain amount of Wi-Fi, you need an additional hotspot to help make sure that that goes on. And then we also provide for our parents if they needed support as well. We have at each of our buildings, there is a parent support person for tech, and they call day and night on the cell phone because again, Dr. Whitaker spoke to this, that we're trying to make sure that that learning is conducive at home. Whenever we do come back to fully in person, it will not look the way it looked before. It can't. It's, when you know better, you do better. Well,
Right.
now we know better. And like Dr. Whitaker was saying, we had 100% of our parents participate in their children's evaluations for special ed. We had the highest participation rate in the history of the district for parent-teacher conferences. Our teachers are saying this is just unbelievable. The communication with home is so much greater now, because what's happening is our teachers are actually coming into their children's homes every day. That, just think about the power of that homeschool connection. It is absolutely at the highest it's ever been. So
if I could add to that, Reverend Jeanette, relevant to this PD piece, I want to advance the conversation a little bit to talk about. So I mimic and echo all that Dr. Leek said. We've probably tripled the amount of professional development that we made available to our teachers, because we don't have to just train them after school now. When they put our students into the groups where they're working on their own, we'll pull teachers out for grade level team meetings. So I think it's safe to say that we've tripled the PD. We've had 2 different professional development tracks, one being focused on content, the other one being focused on how you turn the computer on and what is this thing called Zoom, right? So 2 different tracks. But the other thing that I think is important to share, and for the purpose of lifting the conversation, is what we learned, even as it related to training. We grew the companies, the textbook companies that work with our organizations. We actually worked closely with them, and we grew with them. And what I learned in particular is that the textbook companies, most of them provide online curriculum. What I learned from the heads of the textbook companies is their departments were never designed to have us engage in online learning at a pre-K 8 level 5 days a week for 9 months.
right.
Their whole departments were not built to do that. And so I won't name companies, but I'll say one company that we worked with was better equipped in terms of the curricular materials and the curriculum that they made available to us than another company. And so kind of sitting in the middle, and my role as deputy superintendent, I was, because at this point, we're all in this together, right? Able to provide some feedback from teachers about the hiccups that they were running into as they want to implement the curriculum. And so I think, again, the changes, the growth has happened, not just at my level and Dr. Lee's level, but those companies that are providing us with the materials that we need to be successful during this time frame.
I think this is really interesting because Reverend Jackson often talks about the 5 A's, as you all know, of excellence. And one of them is obviously academic rigor, which now has changed to a remote environment. The other is attendance. How's the, so I want to ask you to look at those 5 A's, academic rigor, attendance by students, attendance you've already addressed by parents. You got greater parent participation, the atmosphere of the learning environment, how has that changed? And the academic progress of the students. Do you feel that they're adjusting appropriately?
Some of our students are doing way better than they did in person. And I think some of it speaks to the availability for intervention and enrichment at a faster pace than when we've been in person. And what I mean by that is, so if I have a class of students and I see that I've got some students who are struggling, I can pull them off into a breakout room and give them some attention while my other students are doing some asynchronous activities. But at the same time, for those students who are really excelling, we can push them further and faster. And we also are administering our assessments remotely. So we're able to track and see how students are performing. What I am finding quite remarkable about the experience is that our students, especially those who are really excelling, are finding other opportunities that they're then sharing with their teacher and their classmates. So it's a growing experience for all of us together.
We attacked the topic of assessing how our students are performing in 2 prongs. Number one was how were they performing academically, and then we tied that to how many times are students logging on and the like, right? Because if students are not logging on, then the performance is going to be what the performance is going to be. So our district leadership team, if I might use this term, has just operated in straight beast mode this year. Literally tracking every move that our students make. Now, in direct response, and I'll be brief to your question about our performance, we've seen statistically significant improvements in our students' performance when we compare their math assessment results, fall assessment versus the winter. Statistically significant improvements in math. We did not see statistically significant improvements when we compared our fall assessment to our winter assessment. And the ideal results are fall to spring, but we got the fall and we got the winter. Now there's several variables that we have to take into consideration when we figure out why that happened. One, in part, we assessed our students in the fall on the property. Even though all of our students were 100% remote, we got them on the property. Almost 100% of our entire student population showed up. By the time we got to the winter, and there was different interpretations of the degree of concern relevant to coronavirus, we decided that the winter assessment would be all off the property. So parents had to manage that. So there may be some variables that impact student performance there. But I also want to keep the district on the hook, because I don't always like to say, oh, we've got it all figured out, we've got it all right. With regards to our reading curriculum, and all due fairness to transparency, there are some areas that we've got to tighten up as it relates to our reading curriculum. So I don't know that we can say that our students didn't fare well in the area of reading because the home environment didn't allow it, as much as I can say, let's tighten up our reading curriculum and our delivery of instruction in that area on the property and remotely, and then we can come back to you with the answer to that question.
I think these are some tremendous insights. I think that both of you have shared some tremendous insights for both parents and for educators. It's interesting because, as both of you have said, we're not going back to where we were. And so making these kinds of adjustments. And the final A that I didn't say was the attitude of the students. How are the students adjusting?
We want kids to be successful, and we will dig down inside and pull out all kinds of things that we didn't even know existed, because we want to see our students be successful. And really, where we are right now, like I said, we can't look the way we looked before. We will have to pivot to the new normal when we bring children back in. And we actually are planning for our students to come back fourth quarter for those parents who want their children to be in session. And we have done a yeoman's job of making sure that we will have safe buildings for our children, safe spaces, everything from our self-certification, the mask, the cleaning protocols. We've got plexiglass around the desk. There's thermal scanners when you walk in the building so that we can take your temperature. We actually are about to start, we are a pilot site for COVID-19 rapid testing. So we'll be able to test people on site. So as we're doing all of this to prepare for our students to return, I am believing firmly that the lessons that we are learning right now will create just generations to come that would not have benefited if we had not had this window. And, when I share with my staff and my team all the time, this could have happened 20 years ago. It could have happened 20 years from now, but it didn't happen right now. And it happened right now because I believe firmly that we are the right people. We're in the right place at the right time to significantly impact generations to come. So I'm grateful that I had the purpose, that this was my purpose, was to be here right now. I'm grateful for that.
I think this is something that we're going to have to do ongoing, ladies, at least once a month, really do an education roundtable. Most people don't know what you just shared today. We don't know how you make this work.
So I'm so excited to share with you all that what is coming next is information and clips from our amazing education town hall. Push for Excellence, also referred to as Push Excel, recently launched an education series entitled Shaping America's Education Agenda. And in January, we hosted series 2 in this episode, where the focus was really to focus on the extent to which Dr. King's dream had actually been realized as it relates to achieving the goal of equity in education. And we were thrilled to bring on panelists from all over the country, experts from various backgrounds, to answer from their perspective, again, the extent to which we believe that the dream has been realized. We were also excited to launch a new feature in our education series, and this feature moved us closer toward engaging our participants, engaging our viewing audience in the discussion. So throughout various aspects of the town hall discussion, we conducted polls where we posed quite the same level of questions to our participating audience that we posed to the panelists. One of the questions that were posed, which you will have an opportunity to view, is the extent to which our participants actually believe Dr. King's dream has been realized. And throughout our last town hall summit, as much as we all remain optimistic about our ability to contribute to the betterment of our society, we did have to come to terms with the facts that almost 90% of our program participants said that to date, his dream has not been realized. And so that is one of many reasons why Push for Excellence, also referred to as Push Excel, is going to continue to launch our national town hall discussions, because we want to build from every session, take what we learned from our participating audience, take what we learned from our panelist experts, and use that information to ultimately build not only the next town hall discussion, but to ultimately build policy recommendations for consideration during the Biden administration and beyond.
Greetings, friends. This is Dr. Joseph Bryant Jr., Executive Director of the Rainbow Push Silicon Valley Bay Area, and we have been grateful for the opportunity to serve our community and really serve the nation during the pandemic with various programs like our technology program, which is called Faith Tech. Many of the churches around the country have been blessed and benefited as we have empowered them and equipped them to better serve their congregations during this time with live streaming, with technology development, Zooms, and we've also been able to create a partnership with the City and County of San Francisco under Mayor London Breed and the city departments, where we are doing a monthly town hall gathering we're calling Keep Hope Alive. And the Keep Hope Alive is a community forum that we can gather and share information that's pertinent to our community. This month, we had 3 phenomenal African-American physicians that came on to talk about the vaccine, all of the relevant information, all of the medical science, all of the insight that we needed as a community to understand its impact. And so I want to just share a few snippets with you from our Keep Hope Alive town hall meeting. You can go to our website, Rainbow Push SV, which is for Silicon Valley, if you want to see the entire presentation of a little bit of over an hour of our entire program. But this is just a small snippet of how we were blessed by these 3 wonderful African-American physicians that came on to let us know how we can learn more about the vaccine, take better care of ourselves, and keep hope alive. Watch this.
Let me quickly move to these next 2 wonderful presenters. We've just been blessed already by Dr. Bennett, but I'm grateful to University of California, San Francisco, UCSF, big time shout out, because they are our local entity that is amazing. They've been, you've heard that name, you watch national broadcasts and you hear UCSF, you hear that the news media, the health departments, the national health departments in various places from the White House on down look to UCSF with a high regard. And I'm just grateful that we have 2 of their giants with us tonight. Let me give their appropriate full titles. We have Dr. Malcolm John, MD, MPH, Professor of Medicine, the Division of Infectious Diseases, Department of Medicine for the University of California, San Francisco, and Dr. Jonathan Butler, PhD, MDiv, that means he's a preacher too, and a professional researcher, Department of Family and Community Medicine, University of California, San Francisco. Both of these gentlemen have been on the front lines of gathering information and sharing information and then helping us understand the information. So it's so important to have the 2 of you tonight with us. And so let me welcome, and you all, if you don't mind, again, virtually, you can wave your hand, you can clap your hands, but let's just make them feel appreciated for the work they've already been doing to bless us and benefit us, Dr. Malcolm John and Dr. Jonathan Butler.
As we think about comparing the vaccine risk to COVID-19 risk, each of us needs to make a decision on the pros and cons, okay? What are the risks of COVID-19? What are the risks of vaccine side effects? And, you know, I think it's really important that Jonathan said earlier, we're not here to convince you of anything. What I like to say is we're here to help you make decisions, not from a position of fear, but a position of strength and power, where you are making a personal decision that is informed. You know, a lot of my colleagues I work with in the Black Health like to remind me that a lot of the successes, including the successes of this vaccine, shout out to our Black sisters who are part of developing both of these vaccines, but really a lot of the successes in this country is off of and on the backs of Black folks. And we should be at the front line if we decide that this is what we want. And that's really our goal, is that we should be at the front line. Ayana talked about how they're trying to promote that in DPH. We're doing it by educating ourselves here today, and as Reverend Jackson did himself highlight.
Yes, thank you for that certainly very informative presentation, Dr. John. I think the next slide is basically what is not going to change, that we still need to wear our mask. We need to shelter in as many times as possible, wash our hands, and also physical distance from one another. The next slide, please. So I just wanted to provide a testimony of the fact that I have completed my second shot. My first shot, I did experience some soreness on my arm following the shot, but it sort of went away a couple of days after that. And then in my second shot, I also experienced soreness of the arm, but also an added side effect for me was fatigue, which lasted about 24 hours. Just so to let you know, sort of my experience with taking the vaccine, that you do experience side effects, but at the same time, that is an indicator that your immune system is working.
Let me just ask one other thing of you all, and any of you can share this. If you had just a 60-second message that you could share with our churches, Sunday morning announcements or a promo or something we could, record and drop into our website as a link, or in somewhere we can just make it available, what message would that be? Maybe they didn't get on tonight, maybe they didn't get all of the information, maybe some of these things are, beyond their ability to fully grasp. What would be the direct message to, the person that would typically be sitting in the pews and just needs to hear this as they watch us virtually now? But what is a 60-second succinct message from a health professional, a medical expert who is living this daily in a very real way with an educated way to help us understand? And what would you say to us in that 60-second message?
I have one. If I was standing up in my church to say this, there are, I would say, probably millions of doctors, nurses, scientists, and others who, of some faith, who prayed really hard for this vaccine to show up in the time that it did. I know I did.
My.
Long-term prayers. And so sometimes God delivers and we say no. Please don't let this be that time. If you are looking at this and it does not yet to you look like a miracle, do your research, find someone you trust, and be sure that it's not before we as a community don't take what's being offered. Because I think it was a miracle that it came when it did, as fast as it did, and that it's here before it's changed too much. Many other things have aligned to make this a really precious moment for our community, and I hope we take advantage.
Good morning. We are in the midst of a major drive to get more members, more people engaged and involved in Rainbow Push, supporting the programs of Push for Excellence and the Citizenship Education Fund. If you're interested in public policy and you want to help change the policies that impact those incarcerated, change the policies that impact students attending colleges and universities. If you want to be a policymaker, then you need to join Rainbow Push and join by paying your $35 right now. Some of you watch us every week. You listen to us on the radio. You're viewing us in social media. We need you to become a member. It's only $35 a year. If you believe in the scholarships that we give to thousands of students each and every year, we've awarded more than $10 million to scholars year to date. What do you have to do to give and support Push? It's really very simple. You can go to rainbowpush.org if you're on a computer and press donate. Give any amount. Every dollar is important. You want to talk to somebody, call us at 773-256-2775. You can give right now, any denomination that you choose. You can text the word PUSH, P-U-S-H, to 41444. Text on your cell phone. Most of you have a cell phone. Just text PUSH, P-U-S-H, to 41444, and you can give any amount that you feel comfortable giving. Or call us 773 256-2775, or go to rainbowpush.org and just press donate. Wherever you are, you can support us as we keep pushing for you.
Everybody goes through those days where they just feel like, well, maybe I should just stop, and maybe I should just give up, and maybe I should say, well, it's not even worth it.
It's been one of those days for Andrew Crowley, one of those years. He's been trying to focus on his studies at Columbus State Community College, but his mom died of cancer recently. He hoped to make more time for schoolwork by reducing his hours at Walmart.
And I try to explain to them, well, I need to cut back on some of my time so I can be able to study. And they really didn't kind of agree with me on that.
So he says they let him go,
which kind of led me to be homeless.
Crowley doesn't want you to feel sorry for him. He stuck it out. He even says he maintained A's and B's while living in a shelter during a pandemic. But he came close to being part of a troubling statistic this fall. Community colleges have seen enrollment plummet 10.1% compared to last year, nearly 21% among freshmen, and almost a 30% drop for freshmen who are either Black, Hispanic, or Native American in each group. The total loss at public two-year schools? More than 540,000 fewer students compared to last fall. Put another way, more than the population of Atlanta.
Our students have life.
Desiree Polk Bland, Columbus State's Vice President for Student Affairs, says some of her colleagues took it as a red flag when Crowley began to participate less in his classes. They persuaded him to share his troubles.
We're going to start putting that bread in there, okay?
Okay.
Then they got him a job at this campus-based food pantry and found him permanent housing.
All of these factors interfere with being a successful student. Anything that takes your attention away from going to class, studying, spending time with the material, ends up being a factor that impacts your ability to continue as a student.
56% of Black and Hispanic students have reported that COVID-19 is very likely or likely to force them out of school, compared to 44% of whites. The National Student Clearinghouse Research Center, which tracks college enrollment, says the drop among freshman students in particular this fall was unprecedented. Only 13% of students who drop out return to college, according to the group.
Okay.
There are the logistical challenges, like what Liliana Palafox faces, homeschooling and caring for her 6-year-old daughter without so much as a quiet space to study. That is, when the internet connection actually works.
The internet dropping, not connecting right away, having to move around the house to be able to get signal, and then also like my daughter or my husband sometimes using the hotspot, so we share it.
Then there are the deeper inequalities the pandemic has laid bare.
My father passed away due to COVID-19.
Tyler Lopez's father was already in the hospital with multiple sclerosis when the pandemic struck. He died of COVID-19 in the spring. Lopez tried to channel his grief into schoolwork. He's a sophomore studying jazz drumming at New Jersey City University.
Multiple times I thought about quitting, I thought about just forgetting it all.
Music kept him moving forward.
The drums, that's what prevented it. My love for music, it is hard, but the love outweighs the stress.
Schools are doing what they can to keep students enrolled. Lopez's school, New Jersey City University, is a campus where the majority of students are minorities, and many are from the lowest income bracket. The school provided loaner laptops and Wi-Fi hotspots for homebound studies, in-person classes for visual or high-touch programs, open dorms and libraries for those who need them, and socially distanced sports teams operating on a limited basis. But in a year like this, it hasn't always been enough, says Jody Bailey, the school's Associate Vice President of Student Affairs. Some students have simply disappeared.
I worry about them because of rent, and I worry about them because of food, and I worry about them because of the medical issues that their families have. We know that low-income and minority families in general don't seek out medical assistance as quickly as they should for a variety of reasons, and COVID could tear their families apart. I worry for them.
If my friends are doing it, then we should all take a break together, but...
Melanie Alvarez, a senior at California State University at Northridge, has felt nearly all of the pressure points and one more. She was the first to graduate high school in her family, the first to go to college. All eyes have been on her.
The pandemic happened, like I think my brother and my sister were all looking to me like, okay, what is she gonna do? Like, is she gonna drop out? Is she gonna stay in college? And it was hard to tell my brother, like, you know what, you have to push through, because I also felt at one point that I didn't want to continue anymore.
Alvarez says close friends and study partners have taken a break in recent months, but she decided to continue. The stakes seem too high.
My parents have always told me, you know, like there's nothing that we can inherit to you other than the education, like other than motivation, there's nothing that we can give to you. So my parents' motivation to like go to school is always like #1, and I'm always doing it for my younger siblings. So they're definitely like following my footsteps.
Her brother recently enrolled in community college, so for now, Alvarez says she'll keep moving. The question is, how many others will get stopped in their tracks?
Let me first begin reading one of Dr. King's quotes about education. He states, "At this point, I often wonder whether or not education is actually fulfilling its purpose. A great majority of the so-called educated people do not think logically and scientifically. Even the press, the classroom, the platform, and the pulpit, in many instances, do not give us objective and unbiased truths." And I think we can really relate with our most recent misfortune that in Dr. King's statement at the last part of this paragraph where he says, unbiased truths, I think we can relate to what he was stating then and recognize the fact that this has actually been evidenced in the recent attack on our nation's democracy at our nation's Capitol building. So this idea that unbiased truth, Dr. King spoke it when he was alive and well, leads to chaos. And the reality is that we're seeing evidence of that still today. He talks about the classroom. We're seeing evidence of that, unbiased truths being displayed in classrooms, particularly as it relates to children of color entering classrooms with well-intentioned teachers and well-intentioned educators who are presenting them with curriculum materials that tell them that they don't matter, that tell them that people that look like them have made limited to no contributions to society as a whole. Again, this idea of unbiased truths not being existing during the time that he wrote this statement is still true today.
Dr. King had a keen eye for issues of inequity. And in that keen eye, he called it out over and over and over again. And so if we accept his challenge, we will call it out also. I'm not sure, except for our educators, that education issues are at the top of our agenda. I see people are talking about social justice, that's important. Police brutality, that's important. But the bottom line is education is the bridge that so many people walk over to get to a different life. Education is the bridge that people walk over to becoming, as Michelle Obama would say. And so we have to be education advocates, just like we're advocates for other things.
Education also must imbue individuals with an ability to understand history, to understand different cultures, to understand the world. And if you do all those things, then I truly believe that at the end of the day, just as I have manifested this in my own life, the words of Horace Bond actually ring very, very clear. You know, education then is the great panacea. It is the way forward. It does create in one a mind that is not hackable. And when you have a mind that is not hackable, then I think education has done what education should do.
I think when you look at education, everything Dr. Martin Luther King said, of course, was correct. But in today's world, it even goes a little further because it's directly tied to your economic viability in the modern economy. And the numbers here are staggering. So if you are a college grad, your earnings are significantly greater than if you're a high school grad. In fact, a high school grad only earns about 39% of what a college grad earns. If you don't have a high school diploma, you're only going to earn about 29% of what a college grad earns, which means if a student attending a public school doesn't have the type of education that allows them to develop the numeracy and literacy skills needed to be successful at the next level of education, they're going to be marginalized in the modern economy. So it really becomes a fundamental economic and civic right for every individual student in America, irrespective of their race or income, to receive a very high quality education from their public school. And when you look at the data, and you look at the discrepancy between, let's just say, whites and African Americans in unemployment rates and income and all that other stuff, much of this can be explained by the institutional racism built into the funding mechanisms that govern K-12 education at the state level in most states in America. And I could pick on Illinois because I know Illinois a little better than other states. But in Illinois, when we passed the evidence-based funding model, one thing it allowed us to do was to look at how much money a school district needed to educate the students it served based on their demographics, their income level, et cetera. And what we found was the old system left significant gaps in funding statewide between well-funded districts and lower income districts, but those gaps were even worse along racial lines. So the typical white kid attending an underfunded school in the state of Illinois faced a per pupil funding gap between what their school needed and what their school had of about $2,495 per kid. The typical African American student, $4,670 per kid, almost double. And that disinvestment in African American students had gone on for generations. And so if for generations, your state funding mechanism intentionally underfunds schools for low-income populations generally, but for Black and brown kids specifically, you are creating disadvantage in your economic system, a structurally racist education system that can be resolved. And so the good news is we did pass the evidence-based funding model, as you mentioned, Dr. Whitaker. And since that model's been passed, it's been in place for 3 years now. And $980 million of new funding has gone into schools in Illinois under the model. 89% of that money, or $874 million, has gone to those school districts which educate 75% of our Black kids. So the model's actually working to reverse this significant disinvestment that's gone on for years. The bad news is, that's the good news, it's Illinois, so there's going to be bad news. The bad news is the state still underfunds K-12 education according to the evidence-based model by some $7 billion. So we've got a long way to go to catch up. And this year, there has been no increase in funding, and the state's fiscal condition means next year there probably won't be either. And that's going to set back some of the gains that we are making here to reverse this institutional racism. So I think education is a core civil right, frankly, of everybody in America. And the educational system has to provide each student the opportunity to learn. And our educational system doesn't in America generally, and in most states specifically, for most low-income kids and for all Black and brown kids. We just got to deal with that. There are ways to deal with it. It's time to talk about it honestly and solve the problem.
Part of the problem for us, however, and the challenge is that of all the major professions, we are still the most underrepresented, even though we work with most of our children. So when we talk about equity in education, it is painful. Brown versus the Board was 1954, 66 years ago. Martin Luther King gave his speech in 1963, 9 years after Brown versus the Board. And here we are in 2021, still speaking about and asking the question about equity. And it's a shame. We should not have to discuss this now, but it is what it is now, and we will move forward, and we will cross that bridge, and we will surely get over, as Dr. Malvo said.
But I'd like to offer
offer another opinion, particularly in the space that I sit. I'm a sociologist, so I look at things like education from a structural and sociological perspective. I mean, first and foremost, education is about book knowledge. Carnegie Woodson said, if you control a man's thinking, you control his destiny. So it's important for us to know our history and to know the history of others, to understand where we sit, so that our young people are not trying to figure out on what side of the history do they fall. So you have to have that knowledge. I tell students all the time, you got to know the whole context in which we actually look at systems of oppression, and we also look at American prosperity. So that way you begin to understand how history has been designed. I think it's also important, as my 99-year-old aunt continues to tell me, that you have to have street knowledge. So education is not just about book knowledge, it's actually also knowing what's out there and how do you actually navigate through the tunnels of life? What's your intuitiveness around certain things? As my older aunt used to tell us, you all may be smart, but you have no sense. That goes back to our ability to understand that regardless of the highest level of education that you can attain, there's just some people that still are out there acting very foolish when it comes to the types of decisions, particularly those decisions that advance the African-American and Latino communities. And then I would say finally, and this kind of ties into my work, which is on technology, you have to have education because you need to know truth. Right now, we're in a stage where people believe a lot of what they read on the internet, what they actually pick up from other people that shared through conspiracy theories. They begin to think that these false truths are what truths are about them. If I can go even deeper than that, what some of our young people believe about themselves, that they cannot achieve, some of the greatness of the hidden figures of the women that actually took us to space. The fact that we had just last week people who believed that there was a stolen election in the context of voter suppression begins to tell you that we need to look at education in terms of what types of truths are we managing. And in the technology space, unfortunately, as we get into this conversation, the disinformation and the misinformation has taken over the book knowledge. And it's directed what I believe will become a civil society nightmare if we don't get back on the train of what education is designed for. I want to just say in closing, I appreciate what Ralph said, because people often don't understand that today's society requires more than just a high school education. It does require college, but I'll push it even further. In the technology space in which I work, it's not necessarily about young people becoming engineers. The Push Technology Project tells us that you can code, but you could also install the very wires and poles with some of the technologies that we're writing off actually avail themselves. And that comes to credentialing and certification.
In 2011, the Obama administration created a commission on equity in schools. It was around school finance, but it actually went further. It had a lot of heavyweights on it. Chris Eardley co-chaired it with a co-founder of Netflix. Union people, Randy Weingarten was there, the president of the Urban League, president of the NAACP. Quite a number of individuals were there, but it was a commission that had some recommendations, but no teeth. What we need is legislation. PL 94-142, for those of you old timers who studied special ed, it was legislation for the children with handicapped children in education. Now it's called IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act. It had very specific mandates for the states. Districts had to develop plans. If you were non-compliant, there were penalties. We need a similar legislation from Congress on issues of equity in schools, with metrics, with mandates about how you will arrive at those metrics. You must have a plan that is implementable. And if you fail to do that, there are penalties that can be levied against you. We can't expect people's goodwill or whims will get us where we need to get. Education is part of a struggle. As I said earlier, there's no accident that the first thing that people are denied is the ability to read and write.
I want to say, as a person who, as part of my book, I went to 2 school districts to actually look at a school in West Phoenix, Arizona, that was predominantly populated by the children of immigrants who were always fearful of deportation. So every child in this elementary school had a cell phone. It was not for education. It was to be contacted by the parent. And then I visited a school in Marin, Alabama, the home birthplace of Coretta Scott King, TD Jakes actually grew up there. And there they had a one-to-one solution. It was a consolidated K through 12 school that was about to be closed, but this highly charismatic principal decided a way to get this school together. 700 students, one-to-one tablet under the Obama administration's Connect Ed program. Both schools had it. I was so impressed by the fact that these kids carried a tablet under an arm and a pencil in the other and high-fived the principal out the door. But both schools were low-performing schools when it came to state scores. And it had me thinking when I wrote this paper about the extent to which we as or educators have not fully embraced the power of enthusiasm and motivation when it comes to starting to dispel some of the myths around that have been embedded in educational systems around racism. And it was funny because this was 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. And I remember I had the state superintendent on a podcast soon after who made the same thing. He was state superintendent of Alabama, said, we got great principals like Dr. Trimble, but her school is the lowest performing school in Marion, even though every parent in my tenure there came by to either get food from her. One parent said to me in the interview, because I was doing qualitative research, because of this teacher, my child did not drop out of school, my Black boy. And I went back to my colleague at Brookings who works in education policy. And I said, why is there this disconnect? Why is it that we've not been flexible enough in capturing, if we don't want to call it creativity, but capturing the enthusiasm that comes when we get our students and our teachers motivated and excited to teach kids that come from disproportionate backgrounds? Why is it that they still, when they get assessed by state standards, are still seen as low-performing schools, despite the school in Marion graduating most of those kids to local community colleges and state colleges?
Dr. Lee,
I put that out to educators because I'm still trying to answer that. Yeah.
Dr. Lee, let me answer, and I'm gonna try hard not to start a whole nother conversation. I'm gonna give you 3 answers. Number 1, the tests are culturally biased. Number 2, our students know more than we think that they know, but because the state test does not match what the teachers are actually teaching, the test is the problem, not the students.
That's my point.
I'm just gonna give you the 2, and then
that's my point. And that's my point. I think if we're going to try to address racial equity, we got to start dealing with these assumptions.
And then number 3, that teachers of all races need to be taught how to connect the curriculum and the standards to the spirits and the lives of students of color. And when that happens, the neurons in their brains will expand and they will naturally connect to the content and reach their fullest intellectual potential. I'm winding up, but I think we're supposed to be winding down, right?
We have looked at how we close the wealth gap and how we ensure that our students are being prepared at Morgan to go into some of these disciplines where virtually there are no Blacks, but the salaries are just absolutely enormous. For example, like mergers and acquisitions, like asset management, like investment banking. And so as such, we have partnered with a number of Fortune 500 companies and are seeking to ensure that our students now are going to be on the cutting edge of innovation, and they're going to be able to break through some of these careers.
What I want to say is we need to think about ways to fill this gap, and we cannot depend on the government to do it. We want to get as much money as we can from the feds so our schools are funded fairly. Ralph, I admire the work that you do in terms of this formula that gets our folks done fairly. But some of you are in fraternal organizations, sororities and fraternities. We got to go back to the Saturday school. Monday through Friday isn't going to get it. So again, thank everybody. Thank you, participants, and turn it over to Sonia.
Thank you so much. And I'll close with 2 quick PowerPoint slides, which I think that are really, really important. 2 quotes from Dr. King. As we think about, again, we can't ignore all that's going on in our nation today. What I hope, even when we addressed the inequities in the system, that you come out of this town hall knowing that each of the participants and the president of our organization and the executive director of Push Yourself believed exactly what Dr. King said. Even with the attack on our democracy that occurred at the Capitol, the one thing that brings the panelists and us all together is that we all believe this. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. The final quote. Whatever you do, we do not want you to give up. Again, 90% of us said that Dr. King's dream has actually not been realized. And so I hate to let you go for tonight because we have such a great bond. But the reality is that we all need to get back to our respective organizations and recognize that if you cannot fly, then run. And if you cannot run, then walk. And if you cannot walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, keep moving.
Dr. Kim, I went to jail with a group of 7 students, July 17, 1960, almost 60 years ago. We never stopped moving. I lost a few of jail cells and death. We never stopped moving. I thought it was time to write some of it down so the older generation can learn how we did, and what we did, and how global it was. Whether speaking about Mandela in South Africa, India, Qatar, Gandhi in India, here at home. This book tells the story, so please get it and give it to your friends. Read it, let's argue about it, let's discuss it.
Yep, so the book is Keeping Hope Alive, Sermons and Speeches of Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. It's quite a good collection. You know, we've got sermons and speeches from around the globe because you have made such a global impact, not just here in the US, but around the world.
Thank you for tuning in to our International Saturday morning broadcast. We need your support. Here are ways to give to Rainbow Push Coalition. Text PUSH, P-U-S-H, to 41444 to support the work of Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. and Rainbow Push Coalition. When you shop, Amazon gives. Visit Amazon Smile and select PUSH for Excellence as your charitable organization by starting your shopping at smile.amazon.com.
Hi, I'm Todd Yeary here outside Dr. King's workshop, the Rainbow Push headquarters, where people of goodwill from all walks and all places gather as comrades in the movement for justice and equality. Social justice movements have been birthed in the imaginations of people in places just like this. You can be a part of this justice movement too. Join Rainbow Push as we fight for justice in the 21st century. Go to rainbowpush.org or dial 773-FREEDOM and remember, keep hope alive.
Get involved with the movement.
Somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody.
Join the movement.
If you're not a member, become a member.
I am somebody.
Fighting the most important battles for freedom and justice for all.
You made us change. Oh, trying to bring closer.
Join Rainbow Push.
But you're not pushing me away.
Join